Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Series Emulation Night School, where I show you how to set up some of the most popular emulators out there, how to add your games, get your control set up, and make sure you're up and running so you can start playing some retro games via software emulation. And since on Monday we did the video of Yaba Sanshiro finally updating its Windows build after 2 years, I figured I'd show you how to use this. That way if you want to use Yaba Sanshiro moving forward to emulate Sega Saturn and not Mednafen, you will know how to do it. And honestly, it is a bit of a process, so make sure you follow along and don't skip ahead. You guys always ask questions in the comments that are answered in the videos is because you didn't watch them from start to finish. I do structure these a certain way, so keep that in mind. But honestly, Yaba Sanshiro is a very fun emulator that finally got updated after almost 2 years. While it is not perfect, it is a good time, and by the end of this video, you'll have it up and running on your system. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe, and ring that notification bell. Definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, I got a Patreon link down below as well. And as usual with the Emulation Night School episodes, if you need individual help, I have a $10 Patreon tier where you can get access to me via chat in case you run up against any problems. And if you pay attention in this tutorial, you probably will not need it. So you'll see here it has two different names. Yaba Sanshiro is basically the name that I'm going by, and a lot of people do, and this is by default an Android emulator that now has a new Windows build. I will leave a link to the website below, but if you just Google Yaba Sanshiro, I will spell that out in the video description, you will find the page. And do be aware that this is not a finished emulator, it is still a work in progress, so you definitely want to go through the compatibility status of each and every game you want to run before you get too far involved, and I will show you that later on in the video. But this update is for the 30th anniversary of the Sega Saturn, and like I said, before this, the emulator hadn't seen any updates in over 2 years on the Windows side of things. I don't think many of you use Android emulation, but leave me a comment down below and let me know. And you'll see here, as of November 25th, when I'm recording this video, this is the most recent build, and I would just grab the zip file, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. And it is nice to finally get an updated version of this, because you'll see before November 22nd, the last time it was updated was July 31st of 2022, so there's a lot of massive changes from the Android version of this emulator brought over. So the first thing you're going to want to do is grab that zip file, and you're going to go ahead and put it in whatever folder you want. This does not install, it unzips, so wherever you unzip it is where the application is going to live, unless you want to move it, and even then I don't recommend doing that. So just go ahead and unzip the folder, and you're going to get a metric crap ton of folders and files, but we really only need to worry about one right now. It is at the bottom of this page. You're going to see Yaba Sanshiro right there, .exe. That is the file you're going to want to run. It does use the 2022 redistributable of some software, so if you get an update or notification that that's not installed, go ahead and run that from the folder. But honestly, if you played any sort of modern game recently on your system, you should have that totally fine. You'll see here we are now in the Yaba Sanshiro window, and we have a bunch of different tabs. I'm going to go over the most important settings, talk about how to get the BIOS installed, talk about internal rendering resolution bumps and whether or not you want to use them. But go ahead and just open up settings, and you'll see here the first window is BIOS. You can enable BIOS emulation. You don't need to bring a BIOS over, but I get better compatibility when I add my own BIOS, and I like the High Saturn version 1.02. It is a region-free BIOS, so it'll load everything up, and then you get the fun splash screen as well. So if you want to add a BIOS, this is where you do it. If you don't, just toggle enable BIOS emulation, and you won't need one whatsoever. Everything else in here I would leave exactly as is. And do be aware that you can actually boot Sega Saturn games from the boot menu as well, but this tutorial is going to be predicated on using files, because I think that's going to be what 99% of you out there are doing. I did try it out, it worked totally fine, but this is going to be a file-based tutorial, and when you get everything up and running, you're going to be able to play Sega Saturn games on your PC, and that is a ton of fun. But getting back to the settings menu here, if we go over to video, I would leave it as OpenGL. You can try Vulkan, but I had a lot more of graphical issues on that side of things. I would leave the aspect ratio as original, and your full screen resolution, you can pick that right here. NTSC by default is also what you want. If you want to rotate the screen for Tate games, you can. Now you'll see here you can use filters, I don't recommend them, and then you'll see here internal resolution native, that's going to be whatever the window is, or you can set it higher. If you go to 1080p, like you see here in Die Hard Arcade, you're going to notice that all of the models are clearer than they would be on real Sega Saturn hardware. So in that internal resolution toggle, you can pick whatever you want, and it is real time. You can see the adjustments happen on screen. The only thing that will require a reboot of the emulator is if you switch from OpenGL to Vulkan. Vulkan or back, that will cause the program to restart because it basically has to bring those drivers and other APIs online. But it is fun to be able to kind of pick and choose what you want your Sega Saturn emulation experience to look like, and that internal resolution tab is going to be exactly where you want to do that. But moving back to the rest of the settings here, on sound I would leave everything exactly as is. Do not touch this, everything works perfectly fine. And if you do want to put a cartridge in, you can do it from the cartridge menu here. Like if you want a save RAM, you can go ahead and install that via the drop down menu. But as far as the 1 and 4 megabyte RAM expansions are concerned, it seems like Yaba Sanshiro intelligently toggles those on and off in the background, because I've loaded up Castlevania Nocturne in the Moonlight that uses the 4 megabyte cartridge as a fan patch, and it loaded up totally fine. So it seems like it recognizes what games need the RAM carts and go ahead and takes care of it in the background from there. Or at least as far as I can tell, I couldn't find any documentation on it whatsoever. I just tested the games that required it and they booted up totally fine for me. So moving on to the next and most important settings menu is going to be your input. You're going to have a bunch of different drop downs from the input. Go ahead and select which one works with your controller, and then you can set your controller type here. For the most part, it's going to be just a standard gamepad, and then you'll have the gamepad configuration menu option here from that wrench. Go ahead and click on every single input, and then go ahead and press the corresponding input you want to bind on your controller. For this, I use an Xbox Series X controller on my PC, but anything that works on Windows will work. Just go ahead down the line, make sure everything is selected, and when you bind an input, you will get a green check mark, and from there, you are totally fine to go, and it will work on a keyboard as well. So for some strange reason you don't have a single controller, you're totally fine. Under Advanced, leave region as auto detect and don't touch anything else. And if you want to see all the different keyboard shortcut commands, you can pop over to shortcuts, and you can even rebind them if you so wish. And the good thing is this emulator does have save states, and you can go ahead and use Control plus 0 through 9 to save them. That way you don't actually have to go back into the menu, and you can even back them up to cloud. To load them, just go ahead and hold down Alt plus the number 0 through 9, and that will load up your save state as well. And it's great to have save state in emulators. I know you guys really like it. And if you want to have a master directory with photos of all of your games, just go ahead and click Set Directory here and navigate to wherever you keep all of your Sega Saturn files. For me, I'm just adding in Die Hard Arcade for the test. You can go ahead and make an entire library this way once you select the directory where all your games live. And I tried BinQ as well as CHD, and everything loaded up perfectly fine for me. So if you want to make that master library, you just select the directory and make sure all the Sega Saturn games you want in that master list are there, and it'll auto-populate all of the games with images if it can find it right in Yaba Sanshiro. And if you just want to launch a single game, just go to File and click Open ISO, and make sure you choose the Q file. Just double click on that, and the emulator will launch into the BIOS splash screen and then directly into the game from there. So it really is super simple to get the games running once you have the BIOS in, or pick BIOS emulation, and that is always going to be a fun time. And if you have any issues with the controls, like you pick the wrong binding, whether you're on something like an Xbox Series X controller or using a different protocol, you can go back in during the game, rebind everything you want, and make sure it is working. And the games will save, so once you launch them again, everything will be exactly where you left it, so long as you save in something like Nocturne in the Moonlight. And that is just an absolute ton of fun. But let's talk about the compatibility I talked about earlier in the video. Not every single game runs perfectly here. There is a compatibility list. 5 stars going to be perfect, 1 star is going to boots the title screen but isn't playable. I think you really want to hover around the 4-star area, because the 3-star games I tested definitely had a lot of issues. Something like Saturn Bomberman, a game I always test whenever I'm working on Saturn, whether it's FPGA or software emulation, has the flickering sprite problem here. So I really wouldn't consider this to me personally to be playable. So before you go through this entire process to play just one singular Sega Saturn game you've been dying to try, definitely check the compatibility list and make sure that you're spending your time wisely. And I will have a Mednafen guide as well, because there is more than one Sega Saturn emulator, and Mednafen might actually be your preferred choice, but I figured the timing was right to do the Yaba Sanshiro Emulation Night School episode. But honestly, when Yaba Sanshiro is doing everything right in software emulation and playing around with that internal rendering resolution bump, it can look absolutely spectacular, and it really is close to playing real Sega Saturn hardware or using MiSTer FPGA. And of course, unlike FPGA Project, this is a zero-cost piece of software. You just download it and start using it. And while I think MiSTer FPGA is worth every single penny it commands, I understand that everyone out there wants to make that investment or can, and that is why I do have Emulation Night School. But if you follow along with this guide, you'll be able to grab Yaba Sanshiro, you'll be able to add your BIOS, bind all of of your controls, pick your different graphical settings, load up your games, and start playing Sega Saturn under a different emulator that isn't Mednafen, and it's great that Yaba Sanshiro has been updated after over 2 years. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below, but we are done. I'll have videos throughout the week and more Emulation Night School next week. Bye-bye.